What happened to the women who shared their lives with the most infamous men of the 20th century? The wives of Nazi leaders lived in luxury while Europe burned, standing beside husbands who orchestrated genocide and war. But in May 1945, everything collapsed. Some chose death, others faced trials, and many slipped quietly back into society. Were they complicit monsters, naive bystanders, or something in between? Today, we uncover the fates of the wives of Nazi leaders after World War II and the unsettling truths history often forgets. Let's begin with Magda Goebbels, wife of Joseph Goebbels, the notorious propaganda minister. On May 1, 1945, inside Hitler's bunker, Magda made a horrifying choice. She gave her 6 children cyanide capsules while they slept, believing life without National Socialism was not worth living. Then, she and Joseph committed suicide together. Magda's act remains one of the most infamous examples of fanatical loyalty, a woman so devoted to Hitler that she murdered her own children rather than let them live in defeat. Eva Braun, Hitler's longtime companion, shared a similar fate. After years of existing in Hitler's shadow, she finally became his wife on April 29, 1945. Just over a day later, she swallowed cyanide while Hitler shot himself beside her. Unlike Magda, Eva was never deeply involved in politics, but she lived in the heart of the Nazi inner circle. Her death cemented her as the First Lady of the Third Reich for only a single day, an eerie reminder of blind devotion taken to the grave. But most Nazi wives did not die in the bunker. Many faced the daunting task of surviving in a shattered Germany while bearing the legacy of their husbands' crimes. Take Emmy Göring, wife of Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring. Emmy was a glamorous figure before and during the war, often appearing at state functions and basking in her husband's wealth. After Germany's surrender, Emmy was arrested by Allied forces. During the denazification trials, she was branded a fellow traveller and fined. She spent years under restrictions but eventually returned to public life, publishing memoirs in which she painted herself as an innocent victim of circumstance. She lived until 1973, long enough to see a West Germany eager to forget. Margaret Himmler, the wife of Heinrich Himmler, chief architect of the Holocaust, lived a life steeped in Nazi ideology. She raised her daughter Gudrun to worship her father, and both women remained fiercely loyal after the war. Margaret was interned by the Allies, but released without major charges. She lived until 1967. Gudrun, however, carried on her parents' legacy, spending decades supporting former SS officers through an organization called Stille Hilfe, or Silent Help. In this family, the Nazi spirit didn't die in 1945, it simply changed form. Another example of undying loyalty comes from Lina Heydrich, widow of Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague. After Reinhard was assassinated in 1942, Lina inherited his SS pension. When the war ended, she was imprisoned by the Czechs, later by the Allies, but never charged with war crimes. Remarkably, she spent the post-war years defending her husband's reputation, running a boarding house, and giving interviews in which she justified his actions. Lina lived until 1985, unapologetic to the end. Her case reveals how some Nazi wives actively worked to rehabilitate the legacies of men responsible for mass murder. Ilse Hess, wife of Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, lived a quieter but equally obsessive life. After Rudolf's bizarre solo flight to Scotland in 1941, Ilse became a devoted campaigner for his release. Even after the Nuremberg trials sentenced him to life in prison, Ilse defended him publicly, insisting he had been a man of peace. She lived until 1995, carrying her husband's cause long after his suicide in Spandau prison. Ilse's loyalty is a striking example of how Nazi wives often spent their lives reimagining their husbands as misunderstood patriots. Equally fanatical was Gerda Bormann, wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in the Reich. Gerda bore 10 children for Martin and embraced Nazi ideology with zeal. When the Third Reich collapsed, she fled to northern Italy, but her health quickly deteriorated and she died of cancer in 1946, leaving her children scattered and marked by their father's notorious legacy. Other wives did not die so soon. Henriette von Schirach, wife of Baldur von Schirach, the Hitler youth leader and Gauleiter of Vienna, faced direct punishment. At the Nuremberg trials, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her involvement in the deportation of Viennese Jews. After her release in 1960, she lived in obscurity but eventually published memoirs that tried to soften her image. She lived until 1992, an example of how some Nazi wives faced justice, though far less than their husbands. Mistresses also played a role in this story. Hedwig Potthast, Heinrich Himmler's mistress, bore him 2 children. After the war, she quietly disappeared into civilian life. Unlike official wives, mistresses were rarely prosecuted, yet their children grew up burdened by their fathers' names. Hedwig lived until 1994, largely unnoticed, though her connection to Himmler never truly vanished. Anneliese von Ribbentrop, wife of Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister. Joachim was executed at Nuremberg, but Anneliese lived until 1973. She remained devoted to her husband, defending him as a loyal servant of Germany. Like many Nazi widows, she never renounced the ideology that had destroyed Europe. Then there's Charlotte Frank, wife of Hans Frank, the Governor-General of occupied Poland. Hans Frank was hanged for his crimes in 1946, but Charlotte lived until 1959. Their children, however, bore the brunt of his infamy. One son, Nicholas Frank, later wrote scathing books condemning his father and his mother, showing how the next generation often wrestled with the poisonous legacies left behind. We should also mention Ingrid Speer, wife of Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister. Unlike many Nazi wives, Ingrid had married a man who later distanced himself from Hitler, at least publicly. Albert Speer was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but after his release, he lived as a best-selling author. Ingrid lived quietly in the background, avoiding the limelight. While Albert tried to reinvent himself as the good Nazi, Ingrid's life was defined by silence and careful distance from scandal. What's striking across all these cases is the lack of accountability. Despite their proximity to power and often open endorsement of Nazi ideology, very few of these women faced serious consequences. Some died in despair, like Magda Goebbels. Others reinvented themselves, like Emmy Göring. Many defended their husbands to their last breath, like Lina Heydrich. And a few, like the families of Hans Frank and Rudolf Hess, carried the burden into the next generation. Their lives after 1945 raise uncomfortable questions. Were these women victims trapped in marriages to powerful men, or were they willing collaborators who shared in the ideology and benefited from the crimes of the Third Reich? The truth, as history shows, is often somewhere in between. The fates of the wives of Nazi leaders remind us that the fall of the Third Reich didn't neatly end in 1945. These women lived on, some in shame, some in loyalty, and some in denial. Few were punished, many defended their husbands' legacies, and some passed their beliefs down to their children. Their stories are haunting because they show how ideology and loyalty can outlast even the collapse of a regime. But what do you think? Were these women complicit partners in crime, or were they simply products of their time, powerless to resist? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.